Jesus clearly understood himself to be God. He knew that God was the only one deserving of the honor of worship, yet he still accepted it himself.
Yeah.
And in John chapter 20, verse 28, we see this, very clear passage where Thomas knelt down and he worshiped Jesus as his Lord and his God. And Jesus accepted that worship. So this is a pretty good indicator that Jesus believed himself to be God.
Gideon, how are you, brother?
I'm doing splendid, Daquan. I'm doing better now that I get to record this with you. I'm excited to be here. Yeah, guess what I did last night?
What did you do?
I went to your place of work, actually, and I brought my whole youth group with me.
Are you serious?
Yeah, I am serious.
Oh, dang, I missed you.
Yeah, you did. We went bowling and brought the whole squad down there. I was hoping to get the Daquan discount, but alas, no Daquan.
Oh, that's tough.
The problem is we had to plan the event so far ahead, and then you don't plan your schedule far ahead enough for us to be able to match that up.
Yeah, well, that's not on me. But
You know what's crazy is I told all the kids that the highest score would get like this big prize because I anticipated that I would get the highest score, and then I got destroyed both games that I played.
Yeah.
Which is really disappointing for a guy like me.
I mean, what else is new?
What else is new? All right, that's rude. You've never bowled before.
Who, me?
We should bowl before the next podcast.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sounds good. All right, well, Daquan, we have a very fun, special issue at hand, topic for us today.
Yeah.
And you see, there's a lot of kind of superfluous topics that we talk about here on the pod, stuff that we like to talk about, stuff that you can either know or not know, and it's not that big of a deal if you don't know, but it's a cool thing to be able to know, if you're out evangelizing people or even just solidifying your own faith. But this issue that we're talking about today, I think, is one of those few critical issues that if you don't have a proper understanding of the truth, then it's difficult to say whether or not you're actually a Christian. We're talking about the very core fundamentals of the Christian faith. And so our topic today is on the deity of Jesus. And that kind of breaks down into two different questions or issues. The first question is, who did Jesus claim to be? Right? Who did Jesus believe himself to be? Who did others believe Jesus to be? And then the second issue is, did he confirm who he claimed to be? Who was he actually, regardless of who he thought himself to be? So these are two different issues, and we'll kind of take each one in turn. But we'll start off just by asking the question, who did Jesus claim to be? And who should we say that Jesus is? So those are the two big questions that we're talking about today.
Right, yeah. So I think those are really important questions, as well as some other ones that we'll get to. And so to address the first question, did Jesus claim to be God? As we're reading the text, to us it seems like he has, which we think he has. Maybe to the listeners at the time in which Jesus is saying some of these things, they didn't really put it together what Jesus was claiming. But interesting enough, as we look through the Gospels, and especially throughout the New Testament, it seems to suggest that the writers believed initially, or at least came to understand, that Jesus was claiming to be divine.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I think that one of the problems with us living 2,000 years later and halfway across the globe, speaking a totally different language, is that we get this kind of, these degrees of separation that separate us from who Jesus was during his time on earth.
Yeah.
And we have to remember that at this time, the big scandal of Jesus being both fully God and fully man was not that Jesus died and resurrected and even claimed to be God. It was the incarnation that was the really big scandal. The fact that God would be willing to humble himself into the form of a servant and come down to earth. That was the part that people struggled the most with. They really struggled the most with Jesus' humanity, which is why Gnosticism was such a big controversy in the early days of Christianity, because they thought that Jesus didn't have a human body, that he was just God. And so today we're struggling more so with people believe that Jesus was a human.
Yeah.
Right? That's something that very few people will deny. But many people will deny that Jesus claimed to be God, and they will deny that Jesus was God. So Daquan, did Jesus claim to be God?
He did. I think oftentimes we run to the Gospel of John, And what we see in the Gospel of John is the I ams. And as many are aware, the I am is significant because of what is mentioned in Exodus 3:14. And so when Jesus is using the phrase I am, his audience understood that as him calling himself God. Now, the objection that some people would have is that the Gospel of John was written much later compared to the other Gospels. And so the idea here from the unbeliever is that this Christology that we have, that Jesus is God, that was developed much later. And because it wasn't in the earlier Gospels, it seems you have those who are a little bit dubious that this is something that the early Christians believe, right? And so another helpful thing could be even going through to the earliest Gospel, which would be the Gospel of Mark, and seeing Jesus demonstrating that he is God in the things that he does or says, right? And so, for example, we can look at Mark chapter 2, where in Mark chapter 2, he forgives sins. And obviously the question is, who can forgive sins, right? And he also heals the man and he is able to walk. And we can go through like the Gospel of Mark and even give some specific examples in the Gospel of John. But what I think may be helpful, especially for the listeners who struggle to remember the reasons for Jesus being God and maybe wanting to articulate that to people who don't believe Jesus is God, maybe this analogy called, this acronym called HANDS, right? And so H stands for honor, A stands for attributes, N stands for names, D is deeds, and then the S is seating on the throne, I believe, is the S.
Seat of God.
Yeah, the seat of God.
Yeah, and for all of those, it's basically saying that within the Gospels and within the early writings of Paul and the church, we see that they had this understanding that Jesus was equivalent to God in terms of his honors, attributes, names, deeds, and seat.
No.
And if they thought that that whole picture, that whole portrait of Jesus was equivalent to God, then certainly they thought and worshipped Jesus as God. Yeah. And I like what you mentioned about people kind of discrediting John in a bit. And we're not textual critics, right? So this is not our jurisdiction to go out there and start talking about, the time it took to write John and stuff like that. We believe that that was John's eyewitness account. But I do think that there is a ridiculous amount of evidence, even in the other synoptic gospels and in the rest of church history, where we can see that they clearly understood, and Jesus clearly understood himself to be God. One of my favorite passages on this topic is from Mark 14, when Caiaphas was questioning Jesus, and he asked him, "Are you the Christ, the Son of the Blessed?" And Jesus said, "I am." And he went on to talk about how you're going to see Jesus seated at the right hand of power, which is that S in our acronym. And the high priest Caiaphas, in hearing this, tore his robe and said, "This is blasphemy, what Jesus is saying here, and for this he deserves to be killed." Whatever Jesus said in this moment was understood by his audience to be a claim to divinity. And so they clearly understood, even in this early eyewitness account from Mark, they clearly understood that Jesus was God. So briefly, let's go through each of these 5 points on the hands method here.
Yeah, really quick. I think it's important that you mention Mark 14 because I think that's what it all culminates to. Like it all leads to Mark 14. So I think it's really important that you mention Mark 14 just because this is what it all leads to, and that this is like this big thing, right? And I think when we're wanting to understand what is being said in the text, I think it's important to understand how those at that time understood the things that were being said, because the cultural milieu or the cultural context in which it was said was really what's important here. And so when we see the reaction that those at the time had to some of the things that Jesus said, that is how we should probably understand it, rather than maybe how some others would understand it today, particularly with groups maybe like the Jehovah's Witness or Mormons or any occult that would deny the deity of Christ, saying that, no, that's not really what Jesus meant here. Well, you now have to explain why his audience at that time understood it in that way.
Yeah, absolutely. And so kind of, in that same flavor of stuff, let's go to each of these 5 points we're talking about here. And let's kind of give a little bit of biblical evidence and support for kind of what we're talking about here. So we'll start with the honors, right? The people in that time typically attributed honors to Jesus that were traditionally given to God. And the kind of principle that we're talking about here is that people will treat someone differently based off who they believe that person is. So the example I like to give is that my freshman year over at Liberty University, there was this guy on my hall who, we had about 50 guys on our hall. And there was one specific guy who everyone on the hall treated a little bit differently.
Yeah.
And that's because they knew, he was a legend for this, that every single night before he would go to bed, he would get a can of pepper spray and he would pepper spray himself in the face in increasing amounts over the course of time until he was completely immune to pepper spray. No one knew why he did this, but we knew that he did it. And because we knew that about him, we treated him in a different way. And you could tell by the way that we interacted with him that if you had to guess which one of these guys is the guy that pepper sprayed himself in the face, by the way that we treated this guy, you could understand what our beliefs were about him, who he was, and what he did. So in the same way...
There's no way that's real.
That's 100% real, dude.
There's no way.
So in the same way, we can look at the way that people interacted with Jesus and see the way that they kind of understood him to be based off their interactions with him. So I'd like to go to Matthew chapter 4. Again, a non-John kind of example here. And in Matthew chapter 4, we have this incredible scene of Jesus going out into the wilderness and being tempted by Satan 3 times. And for the last and final temptation, the devil took him to a very high mountain and showed him all the kingdoms of the world in their glory. And he said to Jesus, "All these I will give you if you will fall down and worship me." Right? Obviously, worship should only be attributed to God. And Jesus knew this by quoting Deuteronomy 6:13. He said, "You shall worship the Lord your God, and him only shall you serve." Jesus understood that God is the only one deserving of worship, that is an honor that should be given only to God. Yet, whenever we look at the Great Commission later on in Matthew chapter 28, right before in verses 16 through 18, we read that the 11 disciples went to Galilee, and this is after the resurrection, by the way, just in the timeline of things. The 11 disciples went to Galilee, to the mountain to which Jesus had directed them. And when they saw him, they worshipped him, but some doubted. And Jesus, in this moment, didn't say, "Stop worshiping me, worship the Father." Or he didn't say, "Stop worshiping me, I'm not God," or anything like that. Rather, he said, "All authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me." And he proceeded to give the Great Commission, telling them to go out and spread this gospel.
Yeah.
Jesus clearly understood himself to be God. He knew that God was the only one deserving of the honor of worship, yet he still accepted it himself.
Yeah.
And in John chapter 20, verse 28, we see this very clear passage where Thomas knelt down and he worshiped Jesus as his Lord and his God. And Jesus accepted that worship. So this is a pretty good indicator that Jesus believed himself to be God.
Yeah, I think that's really good. And what's so interesting here is that with each of the letters within the acronym for HANDS, we see some overlap here. Like, for instance, you mentioned John 20:28, where Thomas says, "My Lord and my God."
Yeah.
Like, that's also a name, which we'll get to later. And so it's interesting to see how the deity of Christ is like seems to be woven through like a lot of what we read instead of just like being in certain places. So I think that's really good.
So next we have attributes.
Yeah,
the attributes of God. What do you think on this point, Daquan?
Yes. So attributes are what we would say characteristics or things that Jesus does that we only know God to do. So we talked about earlier in the Gospel of Mark that Jesus forgives sins. Like, that is something that only God can do, yet Jesus did it. Jesus also demonstrates a few other things, like the power over sickness when he heals those who are either lame, deaf, or healing them of leprosy, the woman with the issue of blood. Like, he is demonstrating his power over creation. We also see that God is omniscient, all-knowing. I think about in John chapter 1, like towards the end, you see this interaction that Jesus has with Nathanael. And Nathanael is curious as to how Jesus knows him. And Jesus responds, "I saw you under the fig tree." Like, how else would Jesus have seen him under the fig tree? And so it seems like there are things of Jesus, or even moments where, and later in Mark, I believe it's in Mark 4. So Jesus calms.
I don't even know what you're talking about. You're asking me.
Jesus calms the wind and the waves.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah. And so for Jesus is here, he's demonstrating his power over creation, right? Which again, I think that crosses with like a later thing, which will be the S. And so here we just see Jesus' dominion, strength, and power over sickness, over creation, and that he's able to do things that only everyone understands or things that only God can do.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. And I think that the biblical authors understood that Jesus possessed the fullness of deity within himself. And we see that multiple times in not only the eyewitness accounts, but also in some of the epistles that were written afterwards. John 14:9, for example, Jesus says, "Whoever has seen me has seen the Father." And basically saying, whoever has seen my attributes has seen the attributes of God.
Yeah.
Colossians 2:9 says, "For in him, in Jesus, the whole fullness of deity dwells bodily."
Yeah.
Right? That's a crazy statement. And elsewhere, we see that, the biblical authors attribute so much to Jesus that is typically attributed to God. His eternality, his all-powerfulness, his immutability, right? He does not change. He's all-knowing, like you mentioned. He possesses the perfect love of God. And so we see pretty clearly that the very essence of God is embodied in the person of Jesus.
Yeah.
And the Bible is clear on this issue, that Jesus does possess the attributes of God.
Yeah.
Which takes us to our next point, which is the names of God. We've
Yeah.
kind of given a little bit of a teaser, little spoiler, you know. And
Yeah.
but Jesus was given many names that were typically and traditionally reserved exclusively for Yahweh, especially in this very religiously charged culture. For people to give and attribute these names to Jesus was basically to equate him with God. And he was referred to as God many times. The most clear is in John 1:1, where in talking about the Word, the Logos, who is Jesus, John writes, "In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God," meaning that the Word was not God, but was rather alongside God in a way. But then John throws out this ultimate like little brain twister out here, and he says, "And the Word was God." So the Word was with God and the Word was God, right? And this gets into that kind of Trinitarian theology.
No.
In John 1:18, "No one has ever seen God, the only God who is at the Father's side, he has made him known," talking about Jesus. And I have a whole list of other passages here. I don't want to get us just drowned in references here. But over and over, we see that Jesus is referred to as God.
Yeah.
Specifically. And in addition to the ego eimi, or the I am statements, and in addition to the Alpha and Omega, and like all these other names that we see,
Yeah.
he's clearly labeled as God multiple times, which is pretty stark evidence that he believed himself to be God.
Yeah. And I think if we just pause right here, we see not only did Jesus make claims that he is God, though his audience believed that he was saying that as well. And it seems like as time has gone on, the writers of the New Testament and even early church fathers believed the same thing. So this is not something that Christians have made up as time has gone on.
Yeah.
This is something that was believed and taught from the very beginning. So I just thought that was important.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Daquan, thank you. I think everything you say is important.
Likewise, brother.
I don't believe you.
Okay, cool stuff. Oh, so next is deeds.
Yeah.
Right. And so I guess maybe here it would be helpful to jump back a little bit and make a helpful distinction. And so earlier when we talked about attributes, typically when we talk about God's attributes, we mean omniscience, omnipotence, and things like that. And so I think what I lumped in like things that God does, maybe as a result of these attributes.
Yeah.
But what may be a helpful distinction is those things that he does as a result of the attributes is the D here, the deeds. Whereas going back, just the internality as well as the omniscience and omnipotence is kind of what we're like fleshing out there when we mention Jesus calming things like the storm, right?
Yeah.
And in healing those who have some kind of disability or illness.
And especially in the forgiveness of sins, I would say.
Especially in the forgiveness of sins. Yeah. And so even I think there's even great overlap here as well, just with the D and the A.
Yeah, and I think the most important deed of all that is attributed to Jesus is actually the deed of creation. And the whole
Colossians 1,
canon of the Old Testament is very clear and cries out that God alone is the creator of the universe. I have Nehemiah 9:6 here as an example. He says, "You are Yahweh, you alone. You have made heaven, the heaven of heavens, with all their host, the earth and all that is on it, the seas and all that is in them. You preserve all of them, and the host of heaven worships you."
Yeah.
Right? Basically saying, God alone is the creator. Yeah, in Colossians 1:16 and 17, a passage that everyone should memorize, I think.
Yeah.
We read that, for by him, by Jesus, all things were created, whether in heaven or on earth, visible and invisible, whether it be thrones or dominions or rulers or authorities. All things were created for Jesus and through Jesus.
Yeah.
And he is before all things, and in him all things hold together. Paul is saying in that passage that Jesus is the one who created everything, equating him with God. And also, you're right, that goes back to the attribute of Jesus, to be able to have enough power to create everything out of nothing. I mean, that's a divine quality right there.
Yeah.
So you're absolutely right. There's a lot of overlap there, but I think that that's a really important point, is that Jesus did a lot of stuff that only God is able to do.
Yeah. And ultimately raise others from the dead and then do it himself later on.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
That's a big one.
Yeah, that's probably the biggest.
Yeah.
And so the last one we have here is seated on the throne, right?
Yeah. The seed of God. And this is something
seed of God,
that I
so-
mentioned earlier with that Mark 14 passage, where Jesus said that you will see the Son of Man seated at the right hand of power. And whenever he said that, Caiaphas, the high priest, tore his robes and said that it is blasphemy. And you're right, this is kind of the pinnacle of, this is where Jesus is now, right? Seated at the right hand of God. And we know that one day he will judge all the living and the dead, and that he has the authority and the role of God in creation. And so Jesus has been exalted to the seat of God, and it follows that if Jesus resides on the throne of God, commands the authority of God, and does what God does, then he must be God.
Yeah. No, it's really that simple.
That's that simple.
Yeah, it's that simple.
Let's go, baby.
And I guess we can maybe make a shift here just a little bit and mention the significance of this. There's no way that, well, let me back up. We mentioned that the biggest deed was that Jesus died and rose from the grave, right? And the significance of this is that he defeated and conquered sin in the grave on our behalf. And so if this does not happen, we're still in our sins. There needs to be a holy sacrifice. There needs to be God, who is righteous, who has not committed any sins, to be the one to give his life on that cross. And so the implication here is that for those who are in Christ, we have been redeemed and our slate has been wiped clean. We are now seen as righteous. But this is also a status that those who are not in Christ can have, only if they recognize the only way to be made right before God, as Abraham talks about in Genesis 15, as Paul uses Abraham throughout his argument in Galatians, is that you confess that Jesus is Lord and is God, and that he is the only way to be made right before God. For Jesus said himself, I'm the way, the truth, and the life. No one can come to the Father except through him. And so my encouragement to the listeners would just be, on one half, for the believers, there's a lot of evidence that shows that Jesus is God. Right? And what is one of the bigger significance of this is that your salvation is secure and that it's real. And for those who are wanting to be made right before God, Jesus is the only one who can do that. So,
amen. Well, thanks, Daquan. Yeah. And so, like I mentioned at the beginning, these are two separate issues here. Who Jesus claimed to be and who Jesus confirmed himself to be.
Right.
And we know that for Jesus to call his shots and say, I'm going to die and I'm going to rise again 3 days later, and then actually do it all while claiming to be God, clearly there is something going on here with the validity of the resurrection that validated all of the claims that Jesus made, so that it was able to start this huge movement, this cult that we still exists to this day that we call Christianity. And so we'll give special attention to that specifically in a future episode. We've run out of time for this one, but I hope that we've been able to equip you guys, the listeners, with all of the information and tools and evidence that you need to be able to have that firm foundation, knowing that Jesus really did believe himself to be God.
Yeah.
Daquan, do you speak any other languages?
I actually speak 20 languages.
20 languages? Can you tell our listeners goodbye in a different language?
Adios.